Welcome to this report on nuclear power and its biological impacts. While the word nuclear, often associated with nuclear bombs and reactor meltdowns, can often inspire fear in today's society, there's an argument to be made that it is the solution to one of the largest issues to ever face humanity: climate change. The use or avoidance of nuclear energy has many impacts and interactions with life on Earth and its biosphere. The word nuclear comes from the word nucleus, which refers to the subatomic structure at the center of every atom in the universe. Nuclear energy is the energy released in the splitting or fusing of these nuclei. Today, only nuclear fission is used, and it accounts for approximately 10% of our energy production across 440 nuclear power plants around the world. To understand how nuclear energy could help us solve climate change, first we need to understand what climate change is and what causes it. Global climate change is the pattern of changing general or average weather conditions throughout the world. Current climate change has increased the frequency and severity of drastic weather events. While the climate can change due to many things, the climate change facing Earth today is largely brought upon by humanity's excessive production of greenhouse gases such as carbon dioxide and methane, which aggregate in the atmosphere. These gases allow the solar radiation to pass into Earth's atmosphere. However, they block the returning infrared radiation the Earth emits after absorbing the sun's radiation. This causes the average temperature on Earth to increase. Currently, we are approaching an increase of 2 degrees since the start of the Industrial Revolution. Now, the wonderful thing about nuclear energy is that it releases zero of these greenhouse gases. Most nuclear reactors use the highly volatile isotope uranium-235 and split it into other elements. This releases a large amount of energy, which they use to heat water, creating steam, which turns a turbine, creating the electricity that you use in your daily appliances. This process involves absolutely no greenhouse gases, making it contribute nothing to global climate change. However, despite being an attractive zero-emission energy option, the production of new nuclear power plants and the amount they contribute to the energy grid has stagnated, as you can see in this graph. Most of the nuclear power plants in the States were built throughout the 1970s to 1990s. This means outdated technology operating at higher costs. To understand why nuclear energy has not been growing and contributing to the goal of zero-emission energy and has received little support, we must look towards the waste that nuclear energy does produce, the radioactive byproducts of splitting uranium-235. When uranium-235 is split, it turns into other elements, most of which are radioactive. This means that over time they emit particles with high energy from their nuclei and decay into other elements. Nuclear waste is very radioactive and is very dangerous to be exposed to. Currently, the way we store said waste is in spent fuel pools, which are large concrete containers of radioactive waste submerged in water and oftentimes buried in mountains. The nature of said nuclear waste is that it will only finish decaying to non-radioactive substances after 1 million years, and this is certainly not sustainable. To explain why this radioactive waste is so dangerous, we must go to the foundation of life itself, DNA. All cells which comprise life carry DNA, the information from which proteins are built through transcription and translation. This DNA is a right-handed double helix made of a phosphate group, a sugar group, and nucleotides bonded through a hydrogen bonds. The problem with radiation is that it has enough energy to affect the atoms within our cells. This means that when exposed to radiation, our DNA can be damaged. Thankfully, ours and most living beings have mechanism to repair the damaged DNA. This more often than not includes enzymes that will find broken or mismatched nucleotides and then replace them with the correct and undamaged nucleotides. Unfortunately, this process can go wrong and some genes can be altered in the process of being fixed. This leads to the possibility of proto-oncogenes turning into oncogenes and potentially leading to a cancerous cell developing. One specific example of an oncogene is the RAS oncogene, mutated from the proto-RAS oncogene. When this happens, the creation of the RAS oncogene goes unchecked, which constantly sends the message to divide to the cell. This can lead to a cell which grows unchecked, a common and dangerous attribute of a cancerous cell. Another way damaged DNA can lead to cancer is in the destruction of tumor suppressor genes, which help stop cell division, an important function within the cell cycle at checkpoints in stopping cancerous cells from developing and growing unchecked. When living bodies are exposed to radiation, the amount of damaged DNA goes up, and along with it, the probability that the reparation process goes awry, a key reason why nuclear waste is so dangerous to living things. By consequence, to the health effects of radiation on individuals, ecosystems at large can be greatly affected by nuclear waste. If radioactive waste were exposed to an ecosystem, it would cause large-scale death and would likely intoxicate many resources, causing near-permanent resource availability changes and population changes. It would be a highly catastrophic disturbance. First, we can analyze radiation exposure's effect on the food chain. Not only would this radiation directly kill primary, secondary, tertiary consumers and producers, but the sudden decline in population for each of these categories means less food for those species higher up in the food chain. Only producers would see no change to their apparent resource availability. This means that animals with higher radioactive tolerance would be advantaged in this ecosystem. Some examples of these animals include crabs and mollusks. However, these animals are not producers, and they will still feel the effects of resource scarcity and see a population decline as well. Worse would be if the radioactive material worked itself into the food chain. For example, if it contaminated the water and found its way inside of plants and animals alike. This means that not only those animals and plants who drink and contact this water directly will feel the life-threatening effects of radiation on their cells, but the species which feed on those animals and plants too. This can start to affect large areas as species travel from the original source of radiation to other regions or nearby neighboring regions. Generally speaking, as radioactive material works its way into the ecosystem and depletes biotic resources and kills the species the carrying capacity of that region will be drastically lowered. The effects of radiation on individuals and the ecosystems they inhabit is a reasonable fear, and certainly a large reason as to why nuclear energy is not largely supported worldwide, especially considering the headline-making catastrophes such as the Chernobyl reactor meltdown and the Hiroshima and Nagasaki nuclear bombs, all of which hugely increase cancer rates in human and animal populations alike in the areas around those disasters. Of course, most of the nuclear waste that we create is not in nuclear explosions or in reactor meltdowns, but buried in concrete tanks to minimize the exposure our populations and ecosystems have to it. But leaks can still happen. Not to mention that if we were to establish nuclear energy as our main source of energy, we would be creating multitudes more nuclear waste than we are today, and storing and keeping exposure rates down would become harder and harder. Even if we take drastic measures to protect our ecosystems from the waste over the millions of years it takes for the waste to become safe, it is certainly not impossible for a leak to occur. However, the advantages to ecosystems through using nuclear power plants to mitigate climate change is not to be ignored either. Many species are not capable of the fast acclimation and adaptation our ever-heating climate requires. This is why, as a compromise, it may be smart to use nuclear energy to ease the transition from fossil fuels to proper renewable resources, but to also phase it out of our energy grid after fossil fuels have been replaced by renewables. This may still take time in research, as renewables may still take time in research to become widely commercially available, time which the Earth does not have.